By the final months of the Third Reich, the collapse of Nazi Germany was no longer a possibility, but a measurable military fact. The decisive unraveling began in January 1945, when the Red Army launched the Vistula-Oder Offensive, one of the most devastating strategic blows of the entire war. On January 12th, Marshal Ivan Konev struck from the Sandomierz bridgehead in southern Poland. On January 14th, Georgy Zhukov attacked farther north from bridgeheads near Warsaw, and Konstantin Rokossovsky joined from the Narrows sector. German intelligence had already warned that the Soviets had assembled 225 rifle divisions and 22 armored corps between the Baltic and the Carpathians. But Hitler refused to believe the scale of the threat. The German line, already overstretched and short of reserves, collapsed under an offensive that widened to roughly 200 miles and then drove 100 miles deep within the first week. Warsaw fell on January 17th. By January 31st, Soviet forces had reached Kustrin on the lower Oder, only about 40 miles from Berlin. The road to the German capital had been opened not by a single dramatic breakthrough, but by the total destruction of the German front in Poland. Faced with that catastrophe, Hitler responded not with a coherent military recovery, but with political improvisation. To plug the gaping hole in the center of the Eastern Front, he created Army Group Vistula and placed it under Heinrich Himmler, a man with enormous power inside the Nazi state, but no real qualification to command a collapsing army group in open warfare. Himmler's authority over the SS, police system, concentration camps, and internal terror machinery had made him one of the most feared figures in Europe, but it did not make him a field commander. His tenure was marked by confusion, unrealistic expectations, and staff dysfunction. While Soviet spearheads pressed westward and German formations disintegrated, Hitler still diverted major armored resources elsewhere, including to Hungary, fatally weakening the Oder line. Himmler failed to restore control and was eventually replaced on March 20, 1945, by Generaloberst Gotthard Heinrici, one of the Wehrmacht's best defensive specialists. Heinrici inherited a shattered front, fragmentary formations, poor communications, thin ammunition stocks, and troops whose morale had been eroded by months of retreat, catastrophic losses, and the obvious impossibility of victory. Heinrici understood the situation with painful clarity. He knew Berlin could not be saved in any meaningful, strategic sense, but he also knew that a skillful defense might delay the Red Army, preserve some cohesion, and perhaps allow soldiers and civilians to escape westward. He reorganized the Oder defenses into layered positions, including the vital heights east of Berlin, known as the Seelow Heights. There, the Ninth Army, under General Theodor Busse and neighboring forces, would attempt to make the Soviets pay heavily for every mile. When the Berlin offensive opened on April 16, 1945, the Soviets assembled outside the capital one of the greatest concentrations of combat power of the war. By April, the Soviet side had more than 1.5 million men, around 6,500 tanks, and some 8,500 aircraft committed to the broader Battle of Berlin. Heinrici's defensive methods briefly worked. He pulled some forward troops back before Soviet bombardments, blunting the initial artillery effect, and made Zhukov's first assaults far more costly than expected. But tactical ingenuity could not overcome strategic ruin. Soviet artillery fired on a colossal scale, and the Germans had almost no reserves left to seal breaches once the line began to crack. Between 16 and 19 April, the Seelow position was battered open, the last major natural barrier before Berlin had fallen. On April 20th, Hitler's 56th birthday, Soviet artillery began shelling Berlin itself. The city that Nazi propaganda had long treated as the political heart of a supposed thousand-year Reich was now under direct fire. Hitler remained in the Führerbunker beneath the Reich Chancellery, while Berlin was declared a fortress to be defended street by street. The defenders were a patchwork of exhausted Wehrmacht survivors, Waffen-SS units, Volkssturm militia, police, Luftwaffe ground personnel, naval detachments, and Hitler youth boys, some barely in their teens. The city had few true fixed defenses, and what strength it possessed came increasingly from urban terrain and desperation rather than organized operational planning. Soviet troops pushed into the outskirts while artillery and rocket fire pounded residential districts, rail nodes, government buildings, and junctions across the capital. The military crisis now collided directly with the psychological disintegration of the Nazi leadership. The crucial turning point came on the 22nd of April, 1945. This is often dramatized as a moment when Heinrici personally stood before Hitler and pronounced the end of the Reich. But the historical reality is more complex and, in some ways, even more revealing. Hitler's breakdown that afternoon was triggered by the collapse of the military fantasy he had built around a counterattack by SS General Felix Steiner, and by incoming reports showing that no effective defense could stop the Soviet advance. Heinrici, commanding Army Group Vistula, had already made clear that Steiner did not possess the forces to execute the attack Hitler imagined, and he had repeatedly sought permission to withdraw endangered formations, especially the center and right wing of the Ninth Army, before they were trapped. Instead, Army Group Vistula was ordered to make Steiner attack, while the Ninth Army and the LVI Panzer Corps were pulled in contradictory directions. The Navy's historical study of Berlin's defense shows the chaos plainly. On April 22nd, Army Group Vistula ordered Steiner to launch a relief attack, while 9th Army ordered the 56th Panzer Corps to try to link up with it southeast of Berlin, and Hitler simultaneously ordered that same corps toward Berlin. Those incompatible commands ensured that the 9th Army would be exposed, the defense would fragment, and the capital would not be relieved. That same day, according to History.com, Hitler admitted inside the bunker that the war was lost and that suicide was now his only way out. In other words, the decisive verdict was not a single speech, but the convergence of frontline reality, Heinrici's warnings, Steiner's inability to move, and Hitler's belated recognition that his military will no longer have material force behind it. From that moment, each major Nazi leader took a different path, and together those choices sealed both Berlin's fate and the final breakup of Hitler's regime. Hitler chose to remain in Berlin and die there, rejecting any realistic withdrawal to the south. That decision transformed the capital from a command center into a tomb. Joseph Goebbels chose absolute personal loyalty, staying in the bunker and tying his family's fate to Hitler's. Martin Bormann tightened his grip over access and information inside the bunker, using the crisis to reinforce suspicion and isolate rivals. Keitel and Jodl continued issuing or transmitting impossible operational orders long after the military basis for them had disappeared. Heinrici, by contrast, kept trying to save what could still be saved by urging retreat and rational maneuver, which increasingly put him at odds with Hitler. Theodor Busse's 9th Army, rather than being allowed a timely withdrawal westward, was left exposed southeast of Berlin. It would soon be trapped in the encirclement that led to the Battle of Halbe, where the army was effectively destroyed as a fighting force while attempting to break through toward the west. In that sense, the 22nd April crisis did seal the 9th Army's fate. Instead of disengaging in time, it was sacrificed to Hitler's fantasy that it could somehow help relieve Berlin, even as Berlin itself was already being encircled. The political implosion followed almost immediately. Hermann Göring, long designated Hitler's successor, was in the Bavarian Alps when he sent his famous telegram on April 23rd. Referring to the succession arrangements Hitler had established earlier in the war, Göring asked whether, given Hitler's encirclement in Berlin, he should assume leadership of the Reich. In another context, the message might have been framed as a constitutional inquiry inside a dictatorship obsessed with succession. In the bunker, under Bormann's influence, and amid total paranoia, it was read as treason. Hitler stripped Göring of power and had him placed under arrest. Göring, once the regime's most prominent heir apparent and one of the central architects of the Nazi police state and war machine, was politically finished before Berlin had even fallen. Heinrich Himmler then destroyed what remained of his own position. In April 1945, it became known that he had tried to negotiate through Count Folke Bernadotte for a surrender to the Western Allies, while hoping to continue resistance against the Soviet Union. This was not a peace plan in any meaningful strategic sense. It was an act of late opportunism by a man who had built the SS terror empire and now hoped to survive the ruins of the state he had helped radicalize. For Hitler, the revelation was unforgivable. Himmler was stripped of all offices and marked as a traitor. The inner core of the Nazi hierarchy was now openly devouring itself. Göring had fallen, Himmler had fallen. Heinrici was marginalized because military realism had become politically intolerable. Hitler's trust narrowed to a shrinking circle of bunker loyalists even as the military situation became irretrievable. Yes, this was the point at which the Nazi leadership truly finished breaking apart. Because after April 22nd, The regime no longer acted as a unified command structure. It became a collection of collapsing personal loyalties, succession plots, self-preservation attempts, and death pacts. As the Soviets tightened the ring, Berlin's defense devolved into block-by-block combat and symbolic resistance. Soviet artillery fired nearly 2 million shells during the final assault. Red Army troops fought through neighborhoods, rail lines, government sectors, and canal crossings, while German defenders, often boys and old men with Panzerfaust, tried to delay the inevitable. Hitler still issued hopeless orders to armies that scarcely existed. On April 23rd, he pulled the LVI Panzer Corps into Berlin without properly coordinating with 9th Army or Army Group Vistula, worsening the dislocation of the remaining eastern defenses. Heinrici continued to resist irrational holdfast orders and was relieved of command on April 28th. His dismissal removed one of the last senior officers still trying to match orders to reality. That left the Reich's Eastern Command in terminal disorder, just as the city's fate was being decided in the streets. Hitler spent his final days inside the bunker as the state around him disappeared. On April 29th, in his political testament, he repudiated both Göring and Himmler and named Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz as Reich President, Minister of War, and Supreme Commander. The choice mattered less as a plan for governing Germany than as a final act of exclusion against men Hitler now considered traitors. Dönitz, already placed in charge of the Northern Command on April 20th, would preside only briefly over the dying remains of the Reich. On April 30th, with Soviet troops closing around the government district, Hitler married Eva Braun and then committed suicide. Goebbels followed the next day after murdering his children with Magda Goebbels. Negotiations for surrender began on May 1st, and on May 2nd, Berlin surrendered. According to Britannica, the Battle of Berlin had cost the Red Army some 350,000 casualties, with at least 450,000 German military casualties and an estimated 300,000 civilians killed or wounded. The Third Reich did not end in one instant or one room. It ended as military defeat exposed the bankruptcy of political illusion, and as each of Hitler's leading lieutenants chose betrayal, delusion, surrender, escape, or death. So what decisions did the Nazi leaders make after the final military verdict became undeniable? Hitler decided to stay in Berlin and die rather than flee. Göring tried to activate succession and was cast down as a traitor. Himmler tried to negotiate separately and was denounced. Goebbels chose bunker loyalty and family annihilation. Bormann chose intrigue and hardline obedience. Dönitz positioned himself in the north and became Hitler's designated successor in the final testament. Heinrici tried to preserve military reality and lost his command. Busse's 9th Army was sacrificed in an impossible situation and shattered in the Halbe pocket instead of being withdrawn in time. And Berlin, already doomed by the collapse of the Oder Front and the fall of the Seelow Heights, became the stage on which the Nazi regime consumed the last of its men, its illusions, and its leadership. The meeting of 22nd April did not create that collapse by itself, but it was the moment when denial gave way to fragmentation and when the leadership of the Third Reich stopped functioning as a government and became only a waiting room for defeat. If you want, I can also turn this into an even more cinematic, YouTube-style voiceover script with stronger suspense, smoother transitions, and timestamp-ready pacing. And if this rewrite helped, please like the video, share it with anyone interested in World War II history, comment with the next battle or historical collapse you want covered, and subscribe for more long-form, carefully researched history.